Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Sin and Tonic. Today's story is that of Mikey Rainsford. We are off to Liverpool. Let's go. Sin and Tonic! Hello, how are we all? I hope you're all doing well. Not going to lie, this one is, I don't know, this one got me in the feels. This one got me very emotional. We are going to Litherland in Merseyside, Liverpool. And this is quite a recent case really. It's the 7th of April in 2020 is the night in question. Just after 11 o'clock that evening, Josh Rainsford, Mikey's younger brother, made a 999 call to say that his brother Mikey had been shot through their kitchen window. People aren't legally allowed to have guns here in the UK. Police, there are armed police. You rarely see them, probably more so in like London, Manchester, places like that. So for somebody to have a gun in this country, you have to go through, it's normally farmers and things like that, and you have to like jump through hoops and sign paperwork, and it has to all be legal and have to be kept in a certain way, things like that. So for a gun crime to happen, it is normally gang related, and obviously these guns are bought and sold like on the black market. So where there are gangs, there are most likely guns. But for that reason, it is quite unusual in this country to have a gun-related murder. So there were 35 homicides committed by shooting in 1 year, 2020 to 2021. So that's only 6% of homicides. Of these victims, 11% were female and 89 were male. So just a little bit of context for how unusual this is really. Mikey Rainsford was 20 years old at the time, and he was a talented being. He was very gifted at skateboarding. So from a very, very early age, that was what he was into. And he was a bit like, someone described him in, I watched an interview as well, which was probably where my emotions came into it, because it was one of the most heartbreaking interviews I've ever seen of a family member. But also there were friends as well, and they were saying like he was a prodigy. He was incredibly gifted with his skateboarding. He was also very well loved. He was so liked. He was a likeable chap. Mikey had gone into the kitchen that night to get some snacks and bits and bobs because he had asked his dad to drive him to his girlfriend's house. That was quite common. He was going to go and stay the night, and he was getting some snacks together, you know, like to have like a picnic. I love doing that, just getting loads of snacks together, having like going for a sleepover or having friends round and just chilling out, eating your snacks. Yeah, lovely. Wholesome. His dad was, it seemed a bit like, not cross about it, but he wanted to go to bed. He was tired. It was like gone 11 o'clock at night. Can you imagine? Just like, oh, I want to go to bed, and your son wants you to drive you somewhere. And they lived in a bit of a sort of, it was an area where there were gangs. However, they felt kind of sort of secluded from that in a way. They were like I'll share some pictures of the road. And they had never really had any issues particularly. There had been one. We'll talk about that in a bit. But for the most part, they were happy there, and it was their home, their family home, and the boys had grown up there, and their sister Jessica as well. So it's Mikey, Joshua, Jessica. They'd all grown up there, and they were happy, and they had all of their memories there. And for the most part, they felt safe. However, because of this gang stuff, his dad was going to drive Mikey to his girlfriend's house. His dad came into the kitchen to hurry him up. He goes into the kitchen, or is about to sort of, you know, come on now, let's get going. And with that, the first shot rings out. This shot hits Mikey in the back, but at this point, his dad doesn't know what's going on. Can you imagine? You're not expecting that at all. And with that, Mikey runs. He runs, and then he's shot again in his chest. They end up in the hallway because they just need to get away from the windows. And in their hall, there isn't a window. So they end up at the bottom of the stairs. And this is when Mikey's dad realises what has happened and the extent of the shooting. And what gets me about this is it's just like that. Like, that's how quick it is. 1 minute he's in the kitchen getting snacks to go and see his girlfriend, have a nice time, wholesome fun. His dad comes in to get him, and like that, their world is turned on its head. It's almost unbelievable to me how quickly these things happen. It's in the pull of a trigger, the jab of a punch, and the flick of a knife. It is that quick, and someone's world is completely changed forever, or ended. Mikey's dad starts doing CPR, and I think this is the interview. I think this is why this interview was one of the most emotional that I have watched, because he just describes his son's knowing when his son has passed away in front of his eyes, and the sounds that his son makes, the look in his eyes, the colour draining from him, and the pure fear and terror. And it got me. That got me. It got me. One of the most emotional interviews I've ever watched, and no parent should have to see that. Just gathering myself. In that moment, when he realised that Mikey had gone, paramedics, police, armed police filled their house, and everything was sort of taken out of their hands. They were ushered into the living room. While all of this is going on, Mikey's mum, who has a number of health conditions, she was upstairs in bed, as well as their daughter, Jessica, and Mikey was taken to hospital in an ambulance. It wasn't long after that they radioed through to the police to say that Mikey had passed away. I guess they were going to see if they could bring him back or save him. Then they don't just turn up and give up. But I think it wasn't long. I think it was 20 minutes after they had left that they then let the police know that he had passed away. And then the whole family had to vacate their house. And this is just heartbreaking because that's their home. This awful thing has just happened and they have to leave. And I read that Michael, the dad, he decided to blindfold his wife and his daughter Jessica because the commotion at the bottom of the stairs, well, it was a crime scene, so they couldn't clear anything up. So there would have been blood and paraphernalia of trying to save Mikey's life. So they blindfolded them so that they didn't have to witness all of that in their home. Investigators arrived and they went over everything, and they believed that Mikey was the intended victim of this shooting, because the first, like when you look at the window, I'll share some pictures, the first shot, he was shot and in his back, and then as he ran, he was shot again. So it's like the gun, whoever had the gun was tracking him. So it was purposeful. They were shooting at him. It wasn't just randomly through the window. And it was quickly believed that this was gang related. The police searched Mikey's room. They searched the whole house, but they searched Mikey's room in particular just to see whether he was involved in any gang. Now, his family were adamant that that was not the case, and it would seem that that was true. He was not involved in criminal gang-related activity, and his room showed that too. There was no money, drugs, weapons, anything on his laptop or his phone or anything like that to suggest that he was involved in anything like that. Nobody wants to speak out about these things because they fear for their own lives and for their families. They don't want to grass or, stitch people up. They don't want to. So people weren't speaking. It was quite hard to get information out of anybody. The only place that was not quiet was social media, because people share that information. Within hours, people found out that it was Mikey that had been murdered. And Josh got inundated with hundreds of messages from people to say sorry, share their condolences. But talk about the crime was also rife. So on Snapchat, mainly, people were talking about what had happened. And also, helpfully, possible suspects. 2 names popped up. Nicknames. Worm and Pip. And these names just sort of circulated around Snapchat. Was it Worm? Was it Pip? I think it was Worm. I think it was Pip. There were 2 gangs in the area. KRS, which was the Kirkstone Riot Squad, and the Lineker Young Guns. So the investigators started to have a look at these gangs, and they started to look at Pip and crime. That noise freaked me out. Someone's doing something again. So the investigators do what they do best, and they start digging. Worm and Pip and these gangs. And they find that Worm and Pip, because police must have informants, they must have things like that going on. They find out that Worm and Pip is actually Michael and James Foy. They're brothers. And they are members of the Lineker Young Guns. They sound like trouble. Michael Foy has been arrested previously for, on numerous occasions, selling and dealing drugs to undercover police, Clever Cat. And both of the brothers are known to police for just antisocial behaviour, terrorising their local community, normally on like those scrambler bikes that just making noise and being, well, yeah, antisocial behaviour, you can imagine. Some witnesses did come forward to say that they had seen two men, young men, on an electric bike driving towards Mikey's address, and then they saw it leaving before and after the shooting. This was interesting because previously, an hour before Mikey was shot, a police officer was patrolling around in a slightly different area, and they came across two young men on a bike, a red orangey bike, and because of this antisocial behaviour that happens in those areas, especially on bikes, she called for backup to try and get the road sort of closed and stop the boys from going off on this bike. But that didn't happen. They left. They weren't quick enough. The police weren't quick enough to stop them. So off they go. And this police officer notices that there is damage done to a property. So she goes to have a look and talk to the person that lives there, who happens to be Joyce. She is the mother of Michael and James Foy, and this is their address, this is where they live. So she tells the police officer that not long before, somebody had thrown a brick through her front window, narrowly avoiding her head. And when this had happened, she had got onto the phone, got onto the blower to her two boys to let them know what had happened. They had then come home to assess the damage, and then they had driven off into the night, and that is what the police officer had seen. She'd seen them going off on their bike. Joyce told the police officer in her interview, it's all recorded as well, handily, that her boys had arrived on a red electric bike and then driven off on that same electric bike, but she didn't know where they were going. So the police are now very keen to find this reddy orange electric bike and prove that Michael and James were riding it. They look at CCTV in the days leading up to Mikey's murder, and they see this reddy orange electric bike around the area where the Foy brothers live. And again, it's so grainy. Why is CCTV so rubbish? It's so crap. It's so grainy. So basically they see that people that look like the Foys on this bike around the local area, going back and forward like to their address basically, so it's very likely that it's them, and they just follow their movements, so it's very likely that it is the Foy brothers that are on this bike. CCTV also shows on the night of Mikey's murder that two young men, again it's grainy, they are on this bike and it goes to their address, the Foy brothers' address, and then it's seen driving away from their address, and it is seen, they're caught on CCTV going to Mikey Rainsford's address. So, in the days following Mikey's murder, the police get a warrant for the Foy brothers' home, but what do you know? No bike, no gun, no phones. Miraculously, Michael, James and his mum, their mum, have all lost their phones. All on the same day. Poof, gone, vanished. They've all lost their mobile phones. Nowhere to be found. What are the chances? The gun and the bike have never ever been found. Never found. Despite not having their physical phones, they can trace like phone records without a handset, and they do so. And it shows that, because it's not really accurate, so it's not like, oh, they were they were on that road, but it shows that they went on the night of Mikey's murder. They went from the vicinity of their house, because it's off the masts, isn't it? And their phones, they had their phones in their pockets, and those phones went from around their address to around Mikey's address at the time of his murder and then back to their address. The brothers were arrested and they were charged with Mikey's murder. But all of the evidence is circumstantial. They think that the Foy brothers, and it's a strong possibility that it is the Foy brothers that are on this grainy CCTV, that they're the ones riding around on this bike, like on the days leading up to his murder and then on the night. It's a strong possibility. And even their own mum said that they were on an orangey red electric bike that night. It was a difficult case. There was no bike, there was no gun, there was no physical evidence, just circumstantial, just this grainy CCTV footage and, phone masts, kind of placing them very near the scene, and witnesses saying that the people that did this arrived on a red electric bike. And then Snapchat to the rescue. Snapchat. So I thought that Snapchat was like within 24 hours, whatever you posted on Snapchat was gone. And that's why it's such a kind of dangerous platform, because people can be vile on Snapchat and post things, but then like it can't be traced after that. That's what I thought, and that's why I thought it was so sort of dangerous. But I don't fully understand what happened here, but as part of the investigation, the police were searching for any information about the Foy brothers, and they went to, I guess, like known acquaintances of theirs, and they obtained their mobile phones. So I'm guessing because they didn't have access to the Foy brothers' mobile phones, they then thought, well, hang on, what about other people that they may have communicated with? They will still have their phones. They can't all get rid of their phones. So that's what they did. They went around to anybody that knew the Foy brothers, like close connections, and they collected up their phones as evidence. And somebody had received a message from an account. The account name was Pip. Remember Pip and Worm? Police were able to find that account, Pip, was actually set up by James Foy. So it's his Snapchat account. And he had sent out a message minutes before Mikey was shot. It said, quote, "Tell your ma, duck, don't use bricks." And then there were two bang bang emojis, as in like shot, as in to be shot. Two. Mikey was shot twice, suggesting that this shooting was a revenge shooting for somebody throwing the brick through their mum's window. Underneath this message from Pip was a picture of, or a video, I believe it was a video or a picture of the reddy orange electric bike, like, someone sitting on that, like a picture of that. It was crucial evidence in the case because it showed that James Foy had sent that message on Snapchat. He believed it would be deleted, but I think because the boy that I don't know if it was a boy or a girl, they had responded, it had kept it on their phone. I'm not sure how that works, that's magic. But anyway, so it was there, luckily for the police to have, because it was crucial in their case. It showed that James Foy had intent to do that, and that he was on that bike, and that this was a revenge shooting. Interestingly, Mikey's phone, which was in his pocket the entire evening, the entire day, right up until he was taken to hospital, it showed that Mikey had been nowhere near their mum's address, their house, and that Mikey had not thrown a brick through their window. And I find it a bit confusing as to why this happened to Mikey. There had been an incident earlier on, not that night, but previously, another night, where Mikey had been out with friends and they were all hanging out near a block of flats or in a block of flats, and they were outside the block of flats and he was on his bike, on a push bike, pedal bike, and two young men on a bike, a scrambler bike, which is what the Foy brothers would be on sometimes. They charged at this group. So they sort of on their bike, they drove into the group, and it made the group run away. And most of the people ran into the block of flats to hide and protect themselves. And Mikey didn't. He was on his bike and he didn't want to lose his bike. So he just pegged it home. He just pedalled home and he went directly home and they followed him on their bike. How they didn't catch up with him if they're on a scrambler bike and he was pedalling, but maybe they were a ways behind him and they didn't get off quickly enough, but they followed him home. So they knew where he lived. He never saw their faces because they were in balaclavas, but they chased him home and he jumped the fence and he ran in and he told his dad to call the police. And it was all a bit like scary, really, like that's terrifying. Did I mention? No, I didn't. The reason why it was very terrifying is because the person on the back of the bike had a freaking machete. Sophie. So Mikey had been chased home this time, and then they stole his bike. So he jumped over the back fence, gone inside, very scared, and then they took his bike. They had it on their thingy. They looked out the window, Mikey and his family, to see them revving their motorbike, and they had his push bike and they stole it and off they went. So could these two men have been Michael and James Foy? Did they assume that Mikey had then gone and bricked their house because they'd stolen his bike? Maybe. There was no proof that Mikey had thrown that brick through their window. None at all. But they targeted him and they shot him. So did they assume it was him? It wasn't him. He it wasn't Mikey. So that was something that I thought could possibly have been why he was targeted. But also, apparently a third party was involved. And on the night of Mikey's murder, the brothers had texted somebody else to ask for an address of somebody in that area where Mikey lived, and they gave them Mikey's address. So was it somebody that didn't like Mikey? Was it somebody that was trying to protect themselves and they didn't know any other address other than Mikey's? I mean, if that is the case, that person, God knows what they must feel, incredible guilt, because if that is the case, they got Mikey killed. They gave his address. So to me, it's a bit confusing as to why they targeted Mikey. It genuinely sounds like Mikey was a good boy. He wasn't involved in any of this stuff. Was he standing outside that block of flats with people from that rival gang? Was he just sort of wrong place, wrong time, and these two happened to then follow him home when he was scared with a freaking machete? What the deuce? And something that broke my soul was after that event, Mikey was terrified. He was absolutely terrified. He was so frightened that he asked his parents if they could move. I mean, that would put the fear of God in you, wouldn't it? That would be so frightening. And his dad mentioned how he wished that they had acted on that then, but they didn't. They after that incident, they just thought it was a one-off, and then everything calmed down and nothing happened again until Mikey was murdered. The trial lasted for 4 weeks and the Foy brothers denied their involvement the entire time, and they showed no remorse whatsoever. And I was a bit like, oh, are they going to be found guilty? Because, sometimes if there's no real hard physical evidence, because you have to prove beyond a doubt that it was that person. And I guess, even Mikey's dad said he was worried because it was quite he was unsure whether they would get convicted on the evidence that they had. But they were found guilty, mainly based on the Snapchat evidence. Because if you think about that, an account that was created and used by James Foy, it was his Snapchat account. He had sent that message, "You better duck, tell your ma to duck, don't throw bricks," or whatever that message. He had sent that minutes before Mikey was shot. And it also showed the picture, he was on that bike. He was on the reddy orange bike. Michael, who was 22, he was given a life sentence with a minimum of 30 years. And James, who was 18 at the time, he was given a life sentence of 28 years. Other members of their family were also given sentences. So there was an Uncle Craig, and a neighbour, one of their neighbours, Andrea Saunderson. They were given sentences for perverting the course of justice. Andrea was given 18 months in prison and Craig was given 3 years. I imagine this was for getting rid of their phones or hiding evidence and things like that. And their mum as well, Joyce, she was given 2.5 years for perverting the course of justice. I've just found it. So the neighbour stored their clothes and got rid of them. And their mum damaged her own phone and SIM card, and their uncle stored a bike, and then obviously that was then got rid of as well. So yeah, they just facilitated them getting away or trying to get away with murder. Mikey's family tried to stay in their home, and I think the reason why they didn't move when the original scary incident happened with the machete, is because they'd lived there their whole life and their boys had grown up there. They had so many happy family memories in that home, and that was their home. It was their home. So they didn't just take that choice lightly to just up and leave. They had all of their family memories there. That's where they lived. So they wanted to stay. And also it was where all of their memories and all of the time that they had spent with Mikey was in that house. So they were determined to make it work and to stay there. However, they received vile, honestly, some of the things that I read, they received just vile death threats and horrible messages, threats to kill all of them. So one night, just in the night, they couldn't even tell their neighbours. They just had to up and they had to leave their family home and relocate. There's been stories as well, really awfully sadly, about children, innocent children, nothing to do with the gangs or that, completely innocent, like Mikey, who have been shot in their homes due to gang turf wars. And it's hard to believe. It is so hard to believe that is a reality. Like now, this case was in 2020. There was a case this year, I believe, of a child being shot through the door, like just in the what was it called, like, in the firing line because of gangs fighting, just innocent people like caught up in it. It makes me feel like I can't believe that is in our country. Can't believe that actually happens here. That's a war. That is a war going on. It's a gang war, and children are being killed in their homes. Unbelievable to me. Unbelievable. And when you're living in poverty and you don't have a means to just get out, that must be so terrifying to live there. And for many, that is all that they've ever known. And that is all I have for you on today's case. What are your thoughts on this one, my loves? I'm still feeling very excited to be back. Yeah. Because I had a break, it's weird. It was easier setting up and everything. It was just like, oh yeah, got it down. Know it. But it still feels... Yeah, it felt like it came round really quickly, filming again, because I had my break. I was like, oh, back up the shed, which is nice. It's good. I'm happy about it. Yeah. Anyway, I'm trying to work out a way to film in the car for Patreon videos and stuff like that, and it's really stressing me out. Like megally, because everything I do, it's not right. I want my camera in the car, basically, because my phone, I'm just bouncing around all over the place. So that's my mission this week, is to sort that out, because I'm finding that annoying. It would be so easy when I'm just driving about because I drive about quite a lot. So I was like, oh, easy way to film extra content is just me in the car having a chat. We can talk about stuff. I can fill you in. All of that while I'm driving. But no, it's making me angry that I can't get it right. It's really peeing me off. So, yeah, that's my first world problems today. Also, I'm really looking forward to my food. I've got a basic... I'm going to have like a deconstructed burrito. And I can't tell you how... like sour cream, guacamole, salsa, loads of lettuce, and then the meat atop of a tortilla. Yeah, grated cheese on top. Boom. Kidney beans. Yes. Very excited, very hungry. Can you tell? Okay, I'm going to love you and leave you because that deconstructed burrito is calling me so very much. So thank you for joining me for another episode of Sin and Tonic. I hope you can join me next week for another true crime story, and normally a glass or a jug or a jar of gin. Today I was on the fizzy buble. Needed some water in my life. I've got a headache. I will see you all next week. Bye.